Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, and if you saw in the thumbnail, this is a 66 Lincoln Continental convertible that we're going to dive into. Now, I just did a 66 sedan that had some custom touches to it, and that is one of my recent videos if you want to check it out. If we scroll down here, you will see, of course, ironically enough, just a week or so ago, we had a 66 convertible and a 67 sedan sell. These were $25,000 and $51,000 respectively. The 66 convertible, I didn't do a review on this one, but obviously you can see it's lowered air suspension, things like that. So this one, although it hit 51,000, it probably wasn't going to have the broader appeal that we'll see potentially in this 66 convertible that we're going to look at now. This car was reportedly purchased by Harold Red Boyer, and he was the founder of Eastern Pennsylvania grocery store chain. And from what this listing says, I believe the gentleman that owns it right now that's in Illinois, he believes that he's the third owner. So Red sold it to a gentleman at some point, I think in the 70s. It went to Switzerland, and it came back when this guy purchased it. So what we're looking at is, of course, a 66, and one of the key things that you're going to see with this, I believe Bring a Trailer originally had it just described as a red car, and there was some discussion over it, and I will tell you this, it has been updated. The V code, and I double-checked this before I started, is russet metallic. It's also known as Ember Glow, I believe is how you pronounce it, and what I wanted to show you is here is a 66 from some of Lincoln's social media in the past, and this color is definitely a beautiful color. Now, to me, it looks slightly different than this. Obviously, this car is probably, maybe you could polish it, maybe you could, buff it, maybe, it's hard to tell. I think it is a beautiful color, but I will say that a lot of folks tend to say that the russet metallic is a very similar color to this Ember Glow, and I think it's a 1 year only. Now, obviously, it may be a shade off this car, obviously the lighting and things like that, but I will tell you, I've always liked this Ember Glow photo here, so that's something to kind of keep in mind here. But what I will tell you is, going over this review, the thing that's going to stick out to some people is you have the wide white wall tires, and I get that not everyone likes these. The 61 Lincoln had them factory. I think you could technically order them if you wanted in 62, maybe 63, but it's pretty much widely known that it's either you like these tires or you don't. So that's going to be something that I think most casual, folks that want an older car would be fine with them. Some people call them gangster white walls, and they just don't like them. So obviously tires are very much like the paint on your walls at your house. You can change them out if you have the money to go buy a new set of tires. It's that easy. If we go a little bit deeper on this listing, basically, again, you've got the widest white wall tire you could probably get. So those are considered wide white walls. These are 225, 75 Cokers. Some people love Coker, some people don't. I do believe that company has sold over the years. I don't think it's the same family that owns it. They might be still involved, but that's my understanding. So correct me if I'm wrong there. The interior, to me, I have said this time and time again, I would rather have an interior like this than something that's been redone, because you can apply different products. I only suggest Griot's Garage products, and you can really make these seats look fantastic, and I love the originality. Of course, if they get too bad down the road and there's rips and tears, you can obviously redo them. 66 is one of my favorite year Lincolns, and in 67 there are changes. One thing I pointed out in the past is that if you look in 66, you've got almost like this space here between where the dash and the windshield is at, and I think that's a key thing, because the dashes don't crack in these as much as they do in 67, it appears. So I kind of like this little extra spacing in here. Just, to me, it looks a little bit nicer, and it seems to function a little better so that the dash doesn't crack in some cases. We can see it has the MEL 462 that I believe they believe was rebuilt. These engines are kind of like tanks, to be honest with you, and there's a lot of torque, and they could pretty much survive anything. So it's hard to say what would have caused it to need to need to be rebuilt. Sometimes it's just, hey, the engine's out, let's rebuild it. Now, ironically enough, yesterday when I did a recent review, I had mentioned these battery boxes are not always here, and you will rarely, if ever, see a battery hold down or battery tie down. This one obviously kind of has a homemade tie down, so to speak, and that could have been a requirement maybe when it was shipped overseas. Some places are more strict than other places, but certainly the battery box is here, and it does have some form of a tie down, if you will. That's really only going to matter, I think, like if you were in a fender bender or something. I mean, if you have a standard battery that should be in here on one of these cars, it's not really going to go anywhere, so to speak. There are some photos underneath this car, which is key. I always tell folks that's a key thing. We can actually see the exhaust here. It looks to be redone. Bring a Trailer, of course, always requires this image, which is key, and they do a great job breaking it down. Now, I do know that Bring a Trailer in the past, they have, oftentimes they'll just maybe call a car blue or something like that. They won't always go to the level of detail to name the color, and I think it's just because most folks don't, they're not really paying attention to that. But this time, if it was not listed, it is now. You can see the Ember Glow leather. I think that was also referred to as a Ford color for the paint. And again, this is similar to what I showed you here on this car. I think this is pretty rare to see it in the Ember Glow, but it's a very similar color. This was a DSO 15, which is New York, and this would have been built on November 2nd of 1965, right, going into that 66 model year. The only thing that I think is really odd with this is this right here. It says the above VIN stamping is located on the right front fender apron. Now, if you know these cars, you do know in the engine bay on the apron, there is a VIN number listed there, and that, sometimes is used by your local DMV when you buy a car. I know when I bought my red 65, that's Fiesta red, and I went locally, they tried to, they looked at the door plate, the VIN plate, if you will, and then they were trying to look in the engine bay, but it is kind of hard to see, even on a nice car. This, to me, I think we would all agree something looks a little wonky here. Not saying anything bad, but certainly this isn't factory. So something could have happened. I don't really know. Maybe when it was exported, something had to happen, as far as the import in Switzerland. I don't know. I don't think it's a huge red flag, so to speak. But I would, if I was looking to buy this car, I would just want some more photos. You can kind of see what's going on here, that something seems to be placed here. But again, I don't really have any information on that. I'm not going to click on these videos, but I did watch these briefly before I started, and kudos to the owner and to Bring a Trailer. They did a great job. Here's a walk around, which is about 3 minutes. There's an engine running. There's a driving, top up, top down, power windows, and, oh, by the way, the auto drops. And this guy actually went as far as going, hey, the turn signals work. Now, arguably, I always talk about do not leave these cars running while the car, while your foot is not on the brake. And you could argue and say, well, hey, 66, 67, a little bit different column. I totally agree. But I will tell you this, I've ridden and I've driven 66 and 67s where the column still can fall into reverse, okay? So I highly recommend, unless that steering column has been rebuilt, do not leave these cars idling without your foot on the brake. It's a public service announcement. I've been saying that for a long time. Other folks that have been around these cars 40 plus years have reinforced that to me over the past 15 or 20 years. So I just like to pass along that feedback. And again, it's not specific to Lincolns. Any Ford of that era, and if you drove a Ford back in the day, you may know the column can easily fall into reverse. And if that car is idling and it wiggles and jiggles and it falls in the reverse, well, the car's just going to take off. So unless the steering column's rebuilt, don't leave the car in idle. That's just a PSA. As I mentioned with my recent review, again, I like 66 more because you've got, I think it's 2 or 3 less bars in the grill. Typically you're going to have the star here. Okay. So the Lincoln Star, it is not here. And that sometimes is, not replaced. Like, let's say it's broken or someone forgets to put it back on after they paint a car. But I like to double check. We are looking at a 66 Lincoln, and typically there is the star there. It is missing here. Not a deal breaker, but certainly that's one of those aesthetic things. I do not know what this is. I looked. First I was thinking a camera. I don't know what that is, but there's some sort of little magnet accessory or something right there on the front. You can see a little bit of marking. This will easily come off with some good white wall cleaner. That's very minor imperfection. I do think the car looks good from what we can see. I think the color is beautiful. I love my red 65. This again, I think when we look at the color, I think we would all agree that this is a different color. But I do believe folks in the comments have even suggested that those colors are very, very similar. There is if I remember correctly, there's a trunk piece, I think, that goes on right here that they show. I believe it goes on right there, but it does look good without it, I think. We can see the bumpers do look pretty good from what we can see. They're not perfect, but a lot of times there's going to be some surface rust and things like that, as I pointed out in other reviews. Doesn't look perfect, but it certainly doesn't look bad at all. This car to me seems like a very good driver quality, and even maybe a little higher than a driver quality. I do believe it would eclipse the 50,000 or 51,000 that we saw in the black Lincoln at the beginning, simply because it's more of an untouched Lincoln, so to speak, right? So it's had some things done. Tires have been changed, repaint's been done, so on and so forth. I get that. However, it has more of the originality, which I think typically appeals to more folks. If we can kind of continue down here, the good news is there's a ton of photos, so we can get a chance to see all of the trim here. I like to usually look at it and kind of see what we're dealing with. It does look like, obviously, aftermarket headlights. You will see, and I'm not 100% sure on this, I do know in a lot of these year Lincolns, you will see this screw that holds the front peak molding. And I believe I talked to Tim at the Lincoln Ranch many years ago. Rest in peace to Tim. And I can't remember if this was straight out of the factory or if the dealerships did this when the clips would break. But certainly you will see this on a good amount of Lincolns, especially 66, 67. The spacing in between here is a little bit tight. You will sometimes see this. It can be adjusted sometimes. You got to take the bumper down and whatnot. It doesn't look bad, but I do like to kind of look at all of that to see if you can kind of tell if it's been in any fender benders or anything. It doesn't look bad, but I do just like to point that out. For anybody that doesn't know, these lenses, these are specific screws. So if you ever take these off, make sure you save the screws, and then you can see the stamping on, these are the reverse lights. Now, contrary to what a lot of folks believe, I owned a 67. A lot of folks think that these are the reverse lights here, and they're not. These are actually just reflectors. To me, it would have been a great place for the taillight, but in 66, of course, the taillight moves to the bumper. It's no longer in the body, so the reverse lights are still down in that bumper. We can see here top up. Now, 66, you got some changes. Of course, you've got a rear glass window versus plastic. You also have some changes with the pump and things like that. I'm not going to go into that right now, but the one key thing that I always talk about are these deck lids. You always want to look up underneath these to see how bad the deck lid is. Someone has painted the bottom of this one black, which is probably a good thing overall, which means it's kind of nice and sealed up. But it's hard to tell if there's any, rusting or anything underneath there without a little bit better photo. We can see the dash looks pretty good. Again, you'll sometimes see this one first line here torn. There's a couple places that redo those dashes, but this one looks good overall from what we could see. It does look like someone went in here and put some sort of material down. This is not factory. But it does not look bad. If you think about some people, you might look at this and go, wow, well, I want to change it. I want to get a carpet kit. Yeah, certainly you can. But, how often are people going to be looking in the trunk unless you kind of leave the top halfway up at a show to showcase it, or you're opening or closing it, most people aren't going to see. But I do think it looks pretty good overall. The jack typically does not go in that location, but they've kind of just put it in there to to have it there. We get a little bit better glimpse under the deck lid here. Again, this looks pretty solid, and that's a good thing. The rams and cylinders do look original, so they kind of have these clear lines. If the top is working well, definitely don't, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But certainly this does look like the original hardware here that operates the top. Eventually, if these lines blow out and you're having problems with the cylinders or rams, you tend to then have to change everything, and that kind of goes into having to spend some money. But the good thing is this top looks like it's working pretty well. This is the upper back panel switch. John Cashman is back in the business, for those that didn't know, and John of course sells and services these Lincolns, and he often will kind of upgrade this rear setup. There's a couple of aftermarket pieces as well that people have been using and kind of eliminating this, what we call a hockey puck, which is this black piece of hardware right here. But certainly, again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Just pointing out some things here that I'm seeing. This does have a 2-port versus a 3-port. I've reinforced the importance that so many Lincoln owners and folks like Chris Dunn from Lincoln Land will tell you really want to have the 3-port. There is a T in here. So where this fuel is coming out, it's going through this fuel filter, and then it's going through this hard line up to the carburetor. This is a T right here. And this T fitting allows for the unused fuel to kind of trickle back all the way back to the back of the car. Again, these are unfortunately the replacements that Carter came up with, I'd say circa late 60s or 70s, maybe the early 80s. But if you see the 2 screws on top here, it's a 2-port, and you really want to have the 3-port if you can. It's going to impact you more depending on where you live, what the climate is. So, again, you could argue if it's not broke, don't fix it. If I ever bought a car like I did one time that had a 2-port, I would immediately buy a 3-port, have it rebuilt, or buy one that's rebuilt, and then have it on the shelf. If and when it stops working, then you can easily swap it out. Pretty much anybody can swap out the fuel pump. They're not too bad if you're okay with leaning over the car here, in terms of not having back problems and whatnot. Here you've got, again, the makeshift hold down, better than nothing. You could always take that off if you don't like it. Looks like someone did something here. This is the reservoir for the windshield fluid. So I don't know if someone put some little pump in there, but I think you can buy from the usual suspects the factory little pump. If you don't like the look of that, it looks kind of weird. It's hard to tell underneath this car if anything has been done. Obviously, someone has cleaned, and they did spend a little bit of time spraying some black paint. But it is hard to tell if you look at some of the floor pans and whatnot here. If typically there's a normal texture here, but you can kind of see this texturing. I don't know if any of this has been sculpted at all, so to speak, or if someone just kind of scraped it with a scraper and then they shot it with black paint. It doesn't appear that there's any rust issues that I can see, but certainly that would be one of my only concerns with this car, especially having spent time up north and then, of course, going overseas. But from what I can see, it does look like a nice driver. Now, this car immediately shot up to 27.5, which is, again, about a little more than half of where the black one ended at 51,000 recently. So I would say it's definitely going to be a great buy for someone. It's a great, unique color, great, unique interior. It hasn't been messed with a lot, and it does have the one feature that I wanted to point out. I don't remember how much this feature was. I think it was less than $100. But for those that do not know, this right here by the fuel filler door, this switch, so to speak, you will see it on a good amount of 66 and 67 convertibles. It was not a factory. It was factory, but it wasn't 100% of the car, so it was an option. That's everything I've read, everything I've been told. So you could put the key in here, and you could turn it left or right to open or close the deck lid, essentially put the top up or down. But let's say you cruise somewhere to get some groceries, or you go play golf, it starts raining, you have the top up, you come back to your car, you put the switch in here, you turn it to the right, the deck lid is going to come open, you throw your golf clubs in the back, you turn it to the left, it closes the deck lid. Same thing if you're doing groceries or whatever you're doing. Easy way to get in and out of the trunk, so to speak. Let me know what you think. My gut feeling is it's going to go over the $51K. Now, people do like black Lincolns. I get it. Not everyone likes the air suspension on Lincolns. So I think this one appeals to a few more people with the prices that we've seen and the popularity growing on the 66 and 67 convertibles. Which 67 was the last year that it was made in a convertible from the factory. I would say easily going to go through 51K upwards. My gut feeling is going to be 50 to 60,000. So I think it'll be a strong price. Let's see what happens. Of course, no one knows until the auction is over in 3 days. Stay on the rise, everyone, and take care.